most people live their entire lives without realizing that their mind is quietly controlling everything they do, their choices, their emotions, their habits. And the most dangerous part is this: they believe their thoughts are helping them, when in reality, many of those thoughts are holding them back. This truth is rarely talked about, not because it's complicated, but because it gives you power once you understand it. Your mind was designed to protect you, but over time it learned fear, doubt, and limitation. It repeats old stories, creates problems that aren't real, and keeps you stuck in patterns you never chose consciously. And because this happens silently, most people never question it. They just assume this is who they are. This audiobook is about exposing that hidden control, in simple words. No complex theory, just clear understanding. Once you see how your mind works, you stop fighting yourself. You stop believing every thought, and you finally regain control over your direction. Listen carefully, not because this is secret, but because once you understand it, your life cannot stay the same. Chapter 1: How your mind quietly controls your life. Your mind quietly controls your life because it works in the background, not in the spotlight. Philosophy teaches that the most powerful forces are often invisible. You wake up, make choices, react to situations, and move through your day believing you are in control. Yet most of these actions are guided by automatic thought patterns formed long before you became aware of them. These patterns decide what you avoid, what you chase, and what you tolerate. They whisper suggestions that feel like truth, even when they are not. Because this process is silent, you rarely question it. You assume your thoughts are you. In reality, they are habits of perception running on repeat. Until you notice this, your life is shaped more by conditioning than by choice. The mind controls life by narrating reality. Philosophy teaches that humans do not experience life directly. They experience the story the mind tells about life. Two people can face the same event and live completely different emotional realities because their minds interpret it differently. One sees opportunity, the other sees threat. One feels calm, the other feels panic. The event is neutral, the mind assigns meaning. That meaning determines emotion. Emotion drives behavior. Behavior shapes destiny. This chain happens so fast that it feels natural, inevitable, and true, but it is learned. When you understand this, you begin to see how much of your suffering comes not from life itself, but from the story running inside your head. Your mind also controls you through repetition. Philosophy teaches that repetition creates belief. Thoughts you think often become thoughts you trust. Over time, repeated inner dialogue becomes unquestioned truth. I'm not good enough. This always goes wrong. People can't be trusted. These thoughts were not born with you. They were learned through experience, reinforcement, and emotion. Yet once installed, they guide decisions automatically. You avoid risks, accept less, and limit yourself without realizing why. The mind does not need logic to control you. It only needs familiarity. Familiar thoughts feel safe, even when they are destructive. Safety is not the same as truth, but the mind often confuses the two. The mind controls life by predicting the future based on the past. Philosophy teaches that the mind is a pattern recognition machine. Its job is to prevent danger by using memory. But this function becomes limiting when the past is projected onto the future. A past failure becomes, I will fail again. A past rejection becomes, I will be rejected again. The mind calls this protection. In reality, it is restriction. You begin living in anticipation rather than presence. Decisions are made to avoid pain instead of pursue growth. Life shrinks to what feels emotionally safe. The mind believes it is helping, but it is quietly deciding how small your world becomes. Another way the mind controls life is through emotional hijacking. Philosophy teaches that thoughts and emotions are linked. A single thought can trigger fear, anger, or sadness instantly. Once emotion is activated, logic weakens. You say things you don't mean. You act in ways you later regret. In those moments, the mind is not asking permission. It is running a survival program. You feel as if you had no choice, and in that state, you truly didn't. Awareness arrives after the fact. This is why control feels lost. The mind acted first. Understanding this is not about blame. It is about recognizing the mechanism so it no longer operates unseen. The mind also controls life by creating identity. Philosophy teaches that identity is a collection of remembered thoughts. I am shy. I am anxious. I am bad at relationships. These labels feel permanent, but they are conclusions, not facts. Once accepted, identity becomes a filter. You interpret every experience through it. Evidence that supports the identity is noticed. Evidence that contradicts it is ignored. This selective attention strengthens the illusion. Life then responds to the identity you believe. You do not live as you are. You live as you think you are. The mind quietly enforces this role every day. Fear is one of the mind's strongest tools of control. Philosophy teaches that fear narrows awareness. When afraid, you focus on threat, not possibility. The mind uses imagined futures to generate fear. Most of these futures never happen, yet they influence behavior powerfully. You hesitate, delay, and settle. The mind convinces you that caution is wisdom. Sometimes it is. Often, it is fear disguised as intelligence. Because fear feels urgent, it overrides deeper intuition. You follow fear's advice without questioning its accuracy. In doing so, the mind maintains control by keeping you reactive rather than present. The mind controls life through overthinking. Philosophy teaches that overthinking is the illusion of problem-solving. You replay conversations, imagine outcomes, and analyze endlessly, believing clarity will eventually arrive. Instead, confusion increases. Overthinking creates mental noise that blocks action. While you think time passes, opportunities fade. The mind prefers thinking to acting because thinking feels safe. Action carries risk. Overthinking becomes a subtle form of avoidance. You remain busy mentally while life remains unchanged externally. This stagnation feels productive, but it is not. The mind stays active while progress stalls. Another mechanism of control is comparison. Philosophy teaches that comparison distorts self-perception. The mind constantly measures you against others, often unfairly. You compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. This creates dissatisfaction and self-doubt. The mind then uses that doubt to justify inaction or resentment. Comparison keeps attention outward instead of inward. While you measure others, you disconnect from your own path. The mind controls direction by distracting focus. The mind also controls through habit. Philosophy teaches that habits are unconscious decisions repeated daily. Most of your life runs on habit: how you think, speak, eat, react, and rest. Habits reduce the need for awareness. Awareness requires effort. The mind prefers efficiency. Over time, habits become identity. You stop questioning them. Life becomes predictable, not because it must be, but because awareness is absent. Control is maintained through autopilot. Language is another subtle tool of control. Philosophy teaches that words shape perception. The words you use internally determine emotional tone. Harsh language creates pressure. Absolute language creates hopelessness. Gentle language creates space. Most people never examine their inner vocabulary. The mind speaks constantly, and its tone becomes your emotional climate. Climate influences behavior. Behavior influences outcome. All of this happens quietly, without conscious agreement. The mind controls life by resisting the present. Philosophy teaches that resistance creates suffering. The mind wants things to be different, easier, faster, quieter. This constant resistance pulls attention away from what is actually happening. When you resist the present, you live in tension. Decisions made from tension are rarely wise. The mind prefers imagined improvement over acceptance, yet acceptance is where clarity begins. Resistance keeps you restless. Restlessness keeps the mind in charge. Another form of control is distraction. Philosophy teaches that distraction is avoidance of inner stillness. Stillness reveals truth. Truth can be uncomfortable. The mind fills silence with noise to prevent this encounter. Phones, media, constant stimulation, these keep awareness fragmented. Fragmented awareness cannot observe the mind itself. Without observation, control remains hidden. The mind stays unchallenged. The most dangerous control is unconscious belief. Philosophy teaches that beliefs operate silently. You do not argue with what you believe. You act from it. Beliefs about money, love, success, and worth shape life decisions invisibly. Most beliefs were absorbed, not chosen. Yet they dictate limits and possibilities. Until questioned, beliefs run your life quietly and completely. Finally, the mind controls your life until you become aware of it. Philosophy teaches that awareness breaks unconscious patterns. The moment you notice a thought instead of believing it, control weakens. You create space. In that space, choice appears. Choice changes direction. This is not about silencing the mind. It is about seeing it clearly. When seen, it loses its hidden authority. And that is where real control begins. Chapter 2. Why most of your thoughts are not yours. Most of your thoughts are not yours because they were formed long before you had the awareness to choose them. Philosophy teaches that the mind is a collector before it is a creator. From childhood, it absorbs language, beliefs, fears, and expectations from parents, culture, school, religion, and media. These impressions settle quietly and begin speaking later as your thoughts. Because they sound familiar, you assume ownership, but familiarity is not authorship. The mind repeats what it has learned, not what is true. Until questioned, these inherited thoughts operate automatically, shaping choices without consent. What feels personal is often borrowed. Thoughts feel like yours because they appear inside you. Philosophy teaches that location creates illusion. Just because something arises within your mind does not mean it originated from your wisdom. Many thoughts are echoes of past criticism, authority figures, or collective fear. They repeat phrases you once heard externally, now internalized. Over time, repetition creates belief. Belief creates identity. Identity creates behavior. The chain continues without interruption unless awareness steps in. Ownership is assumed, not earned. Most thoughts are reactions, not intentions. Philosophy teaches that reaction precedes reason in an untrained mind. When something happens, the mind responds instantly based on memory, not presence. This response feels spontaneous, but it is conditioned. You think you are thinking, but you are reacting. Reaction is fast because it avoids effort. Effort is required to think consciously. Without effort, the mind defaults to habit. Habit is not choice. Habit is inheritance in motion. Another reason thoughts are not yours is emotional imprinting. Philosophy teaches that emotions imprint memory more strongly than logic. Moments of shame, fear, rejection, or praise embed deeply. Later, similar situations trigger the same thoughts automatically. You believe you are assessing the present, but you are reliving the past. The thought is recycled emotion wearing new clothes. Until recognized, this recycling controls perception. Control feels natural because it is familiar. Language also steals ownership of thought. Philosophy teaches that words shape reality. Many thoughts exist because language created them. You think in borrowed phrases, labels, and concepts that were never examined. Words like success, failure, normal, enough these ideas were defined for you. Your mind uses them as standards without question. You measure yourself against definitions you did not create. Measurement creates pressure. Pressure creates thought. Thought creates identity. The loop tightens. Social conditioning plays a powerful role. Philosophy teaches that humans fear exclusion more than error. To belong, the mind adopts group beliefs unconsciously. These beliefs later appear as personal opinions. You defend them as my view, without realizing they were absorbed to avoid rejection. This is not thinking, it is survival strategy. Survival-based thoughts prioritize acceptance over truth. Truth requires courage. Courage interrupts conditioning. Media also implants thought patterns. Philosophy teaches that repetition normalizes belief. News, social platforms, and advertising flood the mind with narratives about danger, success, beauty, and worth. These narratives shape internal dialogue quietly. You begin worrying about things you never experienced. You desire things you never needed. These thoughts feel spontaneous, but they were planted. The mind becomes a broadcasting station for external agendas. Another source of borrowed thought is authority. Philosophy teaches that unchallenged authority becomes internal law. When authority figures speak with certainty, the mind records their words as truth. Later, these words resurface as self-talk. You can't be realistic. That's not for people like you. These are not insights, they are echoes of authority. Yet they guide decisions powerfully. Power handed to authority externally returns as control internally. Fear-based thoughts are rarely original. Philosophy teaches that fear is contagious. You inherit fears from environment and culture. Fear spreads through stories, warnings, and assumptions. The mind adopts them to stay safe. Over time, fear disguises itself as logic. It's just practical, the mind says. Practicality rooted in fear limits life. Limits enforced by fear are not yours. They were learned. Even ambition can be borrowed. Philosophy teaches that desire is shaped by exposure. Many goals come from comparison, not calling. You want what you see valued. These desires generate thoughts about inadequacy, urgency, and competition. The mind chases external validation using internal pressure. Pressure feels personal, but its source is social. Without awareness, you spend life pursuing borrowed ambitions. The mind also mimics patterns it sees rewarded. Philosophy teaches that behavior reinforced becomes belief. If certain thoughts brought approval or avoided punishment in the past, the mind keeps using them. These thoughts feel right because they once worked. But usefulness does not equal truth. Old strategies can become current prisons. Another reason thoughts aren't yours is identity attachment. Philosophy teaches that the mind protects identity aggressively. Thoughts that reinforce identity repeat automatically. Thoughts that challenge it are rejected. This filtering creates illusion of ownership. You think only what fits who you believe you are. Belief restricts thinking. Restricted thinking restricts life. Thoughts also arise from unexamined assumptions. Philosophy teaches that assumptions operate invisibly. You assume how people see you, how life works, what is possible. These assumptions generate continuous thought streams. Because assumptions are invisible, thoughts seem self-generated. Awareness exposes assumptions. Exposure dissolves control. Most thoughts are not yours because you were never taught to pause. Philosophy teaches that silence reveals origin. When you pause, you notice thoughts arrive without invitation. They come and go like weather. You did not summon them. Observation breaks identification. When identification breaks, ownership dissolves. Finally, realizing most thoughts are not yours is not disempowering. It is freeing. Philosophy teaches that freedom begins with disidentification. When you stop believing every thought, you regain authorship. Authorship allows choice. Choice restores direction. The mind becomes a tool instead of a master, and that is where real thinking begins. Chapter 3. The fear loop that keeps you stuck. Fear keeps you stuck because it operates in a loop that feels logical while quietly limiting your life. Philosophy teaches that fear rarely appears as panic. It appears as caution, delay, and being realistic. The loop begins with a thought, what if this goes wrong? That thought creates discomfort. Discomfort demands relief. The easiest relief is avoidance. You delay the action, cancel the plan, or stay silent. The moment you avoid, fear relaxes. The mind learns something dangerous. Avoidance worked. This relief becomes reinforcement. Next time, fear speaks louder because it knows you will listen. What feels like protection is actually training. The loop tightens not because fear is strong, but because avoidance teaches it to be. The fear loop controls you by disguising itself as intelligence. Philosophy teaches that the mind often uses fear to justify inaction with reason. You tell yourself you need more time, more confidence, more certainty. These sound responsible, but they are often fear wearing a thoughtful mask. The loop works like this. Fear predicts danger, the mind rationalizes delay, and delay confirms fear's authority. You feel safe temporarily, but your world becomes smaller. Growth requires uncertainty. Fear demands certainty. As long as certainty is required, movement stops. The loop continues quietly, without drama, without urgency, just stagnation. Fear also keeps you stuck by borrowing evidence from the past. Philosophy teaches that the mind treats memory as prophecy. A past failure becomes a future expectation. It didn't work before, so it won't work now. This belief feels logical, but it ignores change. You are not the same person, the conditions are not the same. Yet fear collapses time and convinces you nothing has shifted. The loop uses memory as a weapon. Each remembered pain strengthens hesitation. You stop trying not because you cannot succeed, but because fear convinces you the cost is too high. The loop feeds on old stories repeated as facts. Another part of the fear loop is identity attachment. Philosophy teaches that fear protects identity more than safety. If you see yourself as someone who avoids risk, fear aligns with that image. It whispers, "This isn't you." Stepping outside that identity feels threatening. The loop keeps you loyal to who you think you are, even when that version is limiting. Growth always requires betraying an old self. Fear resists that betrayal. It keeps you consistent, not fulfilled. Consistency feels safe. Fulfillment requires courage. The loop chooses safety every time unless interrupted. Fear keeps you stuck by exaggerating consequences. Philosophy teaches that fear speaks in extremes. If you fail, everything will collapse. If you speak, you will be judged. If you try, you will be exposed. These predictions feel vivid but are rarely accurate. Fear magnifies risk and minimizes resilience. It never asks, "What if I can handle it?" The loop avoids that question because resilience breaks its control. By focusing only on what could go wrong, fear narrows perception. Narrow perception limits options. Limited options reinforce paralysis. The loop closes. Avoidance is the fuel of the fear loop. Philosophy teaches that what you avoid controls you. Every avoided action strengthens fear's authority. The mind learns that fear deserves obedience. Over time, fear does not need to shout. It only needs to suggest. You feel hesitation automatically. Motivation fades before action begins. The loop becomes subconscious. You believe this is just your personality. In truth, it is conditioned behavior reinforced repeatedly. Awareness is absent, so the loop runs uninterrupted. Fear also keeps you stuck by creating false comfort. Philosophy teaches that comfort and growth are rarely aligned. The fear loop offers comfort through familiarity. Staying where you are feels known. Known feels safe. Safe feels right. But safety without growth becomes stagnation. Stagnation quietly turns into dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction increases fear of change. The loop tightens further. You remain comfortable and unhappy, unsure why. Fear never tells you this cost up front. Another mechanism of the fear loop is perfectionism. Philosophy teaches that perfectionism is fear demanding impossible standards. I'll act when I'm ready. Ready never arrives. The loop delays action indefinitely. You prepare, plan, and wait, believing action must be flawless. Fear uses perfection as an excuse to avoid exposure. Imperfect action would break the loop. So fear raises the bar endlessly. You stay stuck, calling it discipline, while life passes. Fear also feeds on imagined judgment. Philosophy teaches that fear often assumes others are watching more closely than they are. The loop convinces you that mistakes will define you forever. In reality, most people are absorbed in their own concerns, but fear creates an audience in your mind. This imagined scrutiny increases hesitation. You silence yourself to avoid embarrassment. Silence becomes habit. Habit becomes invisibility. The loop thrives. The fear loop weakens self-trust. Philosophy teaches that trust grows through action. When you avoid, you miss opportunities to prove resilience to yourself. Without proof, doubt increases. Doubt strengthens fear. Fear increases avoidance. The loop feeds itself. You stop believing you can handle difficulty because you never test that belief. Fear remains unchallenged. Fear also distorts time. Philosophy teaches that fear makes the present feel urgent and the future feel threatening. You focus on immediate discomfort instead of long-term consequence. Short-term relief becomes priority. Long-term regret is ignored. The loop traps you in short-term thinking. Growth requires long-term vision. Fear refuses it. Breaking the fear loop begins with noticing it. Philosophy teaches that awareness disrupts automatic patterns. When you see fear predicting, rationalizing, and avoiding, the spell weakens. You realize fear is not truth. It is habit. Habits can be changed. This realization creates space. Space allows choice. Choice breaks loops. The fear loop also dissolves when action replaces rumination. Philosophy teaches that action clarifies. Thinking fuels fear. Acting exposes its exaggeration. Small actions weaken the loop. You do not need to destroy fear. You need to stop obeying it. Each act of courage rewires the mind. Fear loses authority through disuse. Fear loses power when discomfort is accepted. Philosophy teaches that discomfort is not danger. The loop confuses the two. When you allow discomfort without retreating, fear learns it no longer controls behavior. The loop collapses slowly but surely. Ultimately, the fear loop keeps you stuck only as long as it remains unconscious. Philosophy teaches that what you see clearly cannot dominate you. When you recognize fear as a pattern, not a warning, you regain movement. Movement restores confidence. Confidence breaks the loop, and life begins expanding again. Chapter 4. How your mind creates problems that don't exist. Your mind creates problems that don't exist because it is designed to anticipate danger, not truth. Philosophy teaches that the mind's primary function is survival, not happiness. It scans constantly for threats, even when none are present. In modern life, physical danger is rare, but the mind still searches. When it finds nothing external, it creates something internal. A thought appears, a doubt follows, a scenario forms. Soon, you are emotionally responding to an imagined future. The body reacts as if the threat is real. Stress rises, tension builds. Yet nothing has actually happened. The problem exists only in thought, but the suffering feels real. This is how invisible problems quietly control behavior. The mind creates false problems by confusing possibility with reality. Philosophy teaches that just because something could happen does not mean it is happening. The mind ignores this distinction. A single "what if" becomes a full narrative. What if I fail? What if they judge me? What if this goes wrong? These questions feel responsible, but they spiral quickly. The mind treats imagined outcomes as facts. Emotion responds accordingly. Fear appears. Anxiety grows. You start solving problems that are not real yet. Energy is spent on defense instead of creation. The present moment is abandoned in favor of an imaginary future. Another way the mind creates problems is through overinterpretation. Philosophy teaches that events are neutral until meaning is assigned. Someone doesn't reply quickly. A tone feels different. A look seems off. The mind fills the gap with explanation. They're upset. I did something wrong. This is bad. None of this is confirmed. Yet the emotional response is immediate. The mind prefers certainty, even false certainty, over not knowing, so it invents meaning. This invented meaning becomes a problem you now carry emotionally. You react, withdraw, or worry, all based on an assumption. Reality was simple. The mind made it heavy. The mind also creates problems by replaying the past. Philosophy teaches that memory is useful for learning, but destructive when used for self-punishment. The mind revisits mistakes repeatedly, searching for resolution that no longer exists. I should have said this. I shouldn't have done that. These thoughts feel productive, but they are not. The past cannot be edited, yet the mind treats replay as repair. Emotion relives pain again and again. A finished event becomes a current problem. You suffer now for something that no longer exists. This is imagination masquerading as responsibility. Another false problem arises from comparison. Philosophy teaches that comparison distorts perception. The mind constantly measures your life against others, often unfairly. You compare your internal struggle to someone else's external success. The mind concludes you are behind, failing, or lacking. A problem is born. I'm not where I should be. But should be is an invention. Life has no universal timeline. This imagined standard creates pressure and dissatisfaction. Nothing is wrong with your present reality, yet the mind convinces you there is. Motivation drops. Joy fades. The problem was never real. It was measured into existence. The mind creates problems by demanding certainty. Philosophy teaches that life is uncertain by nature. The mind resists this. It wants guarantees. When guarantees are unavailable, anxiety fills the gap. What if this doesn't work? What if I choose wrong? These questions assume certainty is required to act. It is not. The mind creates a problem called not knowing and treats it as a threat. In reality, uncertainty is normal. Growth requires moving without full clarity. The mind's discomfort with uncertainty creates hesitation that feels justified but is unnecessary. Another mechanism is identity attachment. Philosophy teaches that when you believe "this is who I am," you create fragile boundaries. The mind defends identity aggressively. Any challenge feels like danger. If you identify as competent, mistakes become problems. If you identify as kind, conflict becomes a problem. Life naturally challenges identity, but the mind interprets this as threat. Problems multiply as identity becomes rigid. The issue is not the situation, it is the attachment. Flexibility dissolves imagined threats. The mind also invents problems through catastrophic thinking. Philosophy teaches that fear speaks in extremes. One small issue becomes a disaster. One obstacle becomes proof of failure. This exaggeration feels convincing because emotion supports it. The mind skips steps and jumps to worst-case scenarios. You suffer future pain in advance. This suffering does not prepare you, it exhausts you. Energy is spent fighting shadows. Real problems require energy. Imagined ones drain it. The mind creates problems by resisting emotion. Philosophy teaches that resisting emotion intensifies it. When sadness appears, the mind labels it a problem. I shouldn't feel this. That judgment creates tension. The emotion becomes heavier. Now there are two problems, the feeling and the resistance. Emotions are natural responses, not errors. Treating them as problems adds unnecessary suffering. Acceptance dissolves the false problem instantly. Another way false problems appear is through constant self-monitoring. Philosophy teaches that excessive self-focus breeds anxiety. The mind watches itself constantly. How am I doing? How do I look? Am I saying the right thing? This surveillance creates pressure. Every moment feels evaluated. Life becomes performance. Performance generates fear of mistakes. Mistakes become problems. Awareness turns inward excessively and loses contact with reality. Presence disappears. Noise takes over. The mind also creates problems by predicting rejection. Philosophy teaches that fear often assumes the worst intentions of others. Neutral behavior is interpreted as rejection. Silence becomes disapproval. Distance becomes abandonment. The mind prepares for pain that may never arrive. You withdraw or overcompensate. Relationships strain under imagined tension. The problem was never confirmed. It was projected. Another illusion arises from overthinking decisions. Philosophy teaches that thinking too much clouds clarity. The mind analyzes endlessly, searching for the perfect answer. Each option generates imagined problems. Paralysis sets in. No choice feels safe. The problem is not the decision, it is the excess thinking. Action would clarify. Thinking prolongs confusion. The mind creates complexity where simplicity would suffice. The mind creates problems through language. Philosophy teaches that words shape experience. When you label situations as disaster, failure, or ruin, emotion follows. The situation may be challenging, but language inflates it. Inflated language creates inflated suffering. Softer language restores proportion. Most problems shrink when described accurately. Breaking free from imaginary problems begins with awareness. Philosophy teaches that seeing the pattern dissolves its power. When you notice the mind projecting, exaggerating, or replaying, distance appears. Distance creates choice. Choice restores peace. The problem loses urgency. Ultimately, your mind creates problems that don't exist because it mistakes thought for reality. Philosophy teaches that thoughts are events in the mind, not commands. When you stop believing every thought, many problems disappear without effort. Life becomes simpler not because it changed, but because illusion stopped controlling perception. Chapter 5. Why Overthinking Feels Useful but Destroys Progress. Overthinking feels useful because it creates the illusion of control. Philosophy teaches that the mind seeks certainty before action, and overthinking promises that certainty. When you think repeatedly about a problem, it feels like preparation. You believe you are being careful, responsible, and intelligent. The mind rewards this behavior with a false sense of productivity. You feel busy, engaged, and safe. But safety is not progress. Overthinking delays movement while convincing you that movement is happening. The body stays still while the mind exhausts itself. This illusion is dangerous because it feels like effort without producing results. Time passes, energy drains, and nothing changes. Overthinking destroys progress by replacing action with simulation. Philosophy teaches that the mind rehearses life instead of living it. You imagine conversations instead of having them. You imagine outcomes instead of testing them. Each imagined scenario feels real enough to trigger emotion, yet none of them change reality. Progress requires interaction with the world. Overthinking keeps you inside the head. Inside the head, there is no feedback, only speculation. Without feedback, learning stalls. Without learning, progress dies quietly. Another reason overthinking feels useful is that it postpones risk. Philosophy teaches that action carries exposure. You might fail. You might be judged. Overthinking delays that exposure. It creates the comfort of delay disguised as readiness. "I'm not ready yet" sounds wise, but readiness is rarely achieved through thinking. Readiness emerges through movement. Overthinking keeps you waiting for a feeling that only action can produce. While you wait, opportunities fade. Fear relaxes because you avoided action. The mind learns that thinking is safer than doing. The loop strengthens. Overthinking destroys progress by draining energy. Philosophy teaches that mental effort is still effort. Each repeated thought consumes attention and emotional fuel. By the time an opportunity arrives, you feel tired before you even begin. This fatigue is subtle. You feel unmotivated, not because the goal lacks meaning, but because energy was wasted on mental noise. Progress requires fresh energy. Overthinking spends it prematurely. Overthinking also creates confusion. Philosophy teaches that clarity comes from engagement, not rumination. When you think too much, options multiply. Each option carries imagined risks. The mind treats all risks as equal. Decision-making freezes. You mistake complexity for depth. In reality, complexity is often fear expanded. Progress requires simplicity. Overthinking complicates what could be solved through a single step forward. Another destructive effect of overthinking is loss of timing. Philosophy teaches that timing determines impact. While you think, moments pass, windows close, conversations shift, conditions change. Overthinking anchors you to outdated information. Action would update reality. Thinking preserves the past. Progress depends on responsiveness. Overthinking makes you slow in a fast-moving world. Overthinking feels useful because it mimics intelligence. Philosophy teaches that intelligence is discernment, not volume of thought. Overthinking floods the mind with noise, reducing discernment. You confuse thinking more with thinking better. In truth, better thinking often requires less thought, not more. Overthinking overwhelms intuition. Intuition needs quiet. Quiet disappears under constant analysis. Overthinking destroys confidence. Philosophy teaches that confidence grows through evidence. Evidence comes from action. When you think instead of act, you deny yourself proof of capability. Doubt grows because nothing confirms competence. You begin to believe you are incapable when in reality you are untested. Overthinking protects ego temporarily but weakens identity long-term. Another reason overthinking feels productive is emotional avoidance. Philosophy teaches that thinking avoids feeling. Action triggers emotion. Overthinking keeps emotion at a distance. You analyze instead of experience. This avoidance feels controlled, but it disconnects you from life. Growth requires feeling discomfort and moving anyway. Overthinking delays that contact. Progress stalls. Overthinking also amplifies fear. Philosophy teaches that fear feeds on imagination. The more you think, the more scenarios appear. Most are negative. The mind prepares for threats that never arrive. Preparedness turns into paralysis. Action would reveal exaggeration. Thinking preserves it. Fear remains unchallenged. Overthinking destroys momentum. Philosophy teaches that momentum builds through movement. Small actions create energy. Overthinking stops movement before it begins. Without momentum, tasks feel heavier. Heaviness discourages initiation. The cycle repeats. Progress requires starting imperfectly. Overthinking waits for perfection that never comes. Another hidden cost is erosion of presence. Philosophy teaches that presence anchors effectiveness. Overthinking pulls attention into the future or past. You miss what is happening now. Missed moments are missed opportunities. Progress lives in the present. Overthinking lives everywhere else. Overthinking also distorts priorities. Philosophy teaches that action clarifies importance. Thinking blurs it. Everything feels equally urgent or equally risky. Without action, hierarchy disappears. You cannot tell what matters most because nothing is tested. Progress depends on prioritization. Overthinking prevents it. Breaking free from overthinking begins with accepting uncertainty. Philosophy teaches that uncertainty is not danger. Overthinking treats it as one. When you accept not knowing fully, action becomes possible. Small steps replace perfect plans. Movement replaces noise. Clarity follows action, not thought. Ultimately, overthinking feels useful because it protects you from discomfort. Philosophy teaches that growth requires discomfort. Overthinking trades growth for safety. Progress demands courage, not certainty. When you act despite incomplete understanding, life responds. Feedback replaces fear. Progress resumes. Overthinking keeps destroying progress because it shifts responsibility away from action and places it entirely on thought. Philosophy teaches that thought feels safer than movement because thought carries no immediate consequence. You can think endlessly without being exposed. No one can judge you for thoughts you never turn into action. This safety feels comforting, but it is deceptive. Progress demands exposure. It requires showing up before you feel ready. Overthinking delays that exposure indefinitely. You convince yourself you are still preparing, but preparation without execution is avoidance. The longer you stay in preparation mode, the heavier action feels. The mind then interprets this heaviness as proof that the task is difficult or wrong. In reality, the heaviness comes from delay, not difficulty. Overthinking also fractures focus. Philosophy teaches that attention is strongest when it is unified. Overthinking scatters attention across many imagined outcomes. You think about success, failure, judgment, timing, and alternatives all at once. The mind becomes crowded. In a crowded mind, nothing moves. Progress requires narrow focus, one step, one decision, one action. Overthinking expands focus outward until movement feels impossible. You are not stuck because the path is unclear. You are stuck because attention is divided. Another reason overthinking destroys progress is that it disconnects you from feedback. Philosophy teaches that learning happens through interaction, not speculation. When you act, reality responds. That response teaches you what to adjust. Overthinking replaces feedback with assumption. You assume what will happen instead of finding out. Assumptions are often wrong, but the mind treats them as facts. Without real feedback, growth stalls. Progress depends on correction. Correction requires contact with reality. Overthinking avoids that contact. Overthinking also weakens intuition. Philosophy teaches that intuition emerges from lived experience. It is refined through action, not analysis. When you overthink, you drown intuitive signals in mental noise. You stop trusting your inner sense of timing and direction. Instead, you seek certainty through logic alone. Logic is useful, but incomplete. Intuition fills the gaps logic cannot. Progress accelerates when both work together. Overthinking silences intuition and leaves decision-making rigid and slow. Another destructive effect is emotional exhaustion. Philosophy teaches that emotional energy is finite. Overthinking consumes it quietly. Each imagined scenario triggers emotion, hope, fear, doubt, anticipation. These emotions rise and fall without resolution. Resolution comes only through action. Without it, emotional cycles repeat endlessly. This repetition drains motivation. By the time you are ready to act, you feel depleted. The task now feels overwhelming, not because it is, but because emotional energy was spent imagining instead of doing. Overthinking also creates false complexity. Philosophy teaches that many problems are simpler than the mind makes them. Action simplifies. Thinking complicates. When you act, you see what matters and what does not. When you think, everything feels important. Overthinking inflates small details into major obstacles. You spend time solving imaginary problems instead of addressing real ones. Progress slows because effort is misdirected. Another way overthinking destroys progress is by eroding courage. Philosophy teaches that courage grows through repeated exposure to uncertainty. Overthinking avoids uncertainty by simulating outcomes mentally. This simulation feels like experience, but it is not. Courage is built by facing uncertainty, not imagining it. Without exposure, fear remains strong. Overthinking preserves fear by avoiding real tests. Action weakens fear by proving survivability. Progress requires courage. Overthinking starves it. Overthinking also delays commitment. Philosophy teaches that commitment focuses energy. When you commit, distractions fade. Overthinking keeps options open indefinitely. Keeping options open feels flexible, but it prevents depth. Depth produces results. Shallow engagement produces nothing. Progress requires choosing and committing imperfectly. Overthinking resists commitment to avoid responsibility. Responsibility is where growth happens. Another hidden cost is loss of momentum. Philosophy teaches that momentum is created by movement, not intention. Once momentum starts, action feels easier. Overthinking prevents the first step, so momentum never forms. Without momentum, everything feels heavy. Heaviness discourages effort. Effort decreases. The cycle repeats. Progress depends on breaking this cycle through action, not thought. Overthinking also distorts self-image. Philosophy teaches that identity is shaped by behavior. When you think but do not act, you begin to see yourself as someone who hesitates. This identity reinforces future hesitation. Over time, indecision feels like personality rather than habit. Progress becomes harder because it now challenges identity. Overthinking quietly reshapes who you believe you are. Another reason overthinking feels necessary is fear of mistakes. Philosophy teaches that mistakes are information. Overthinking treats mistakes as threats. It tries to eliminate error through planning. This is impossible. Error is unavoidable. Progress requires learning through mistakes. Overthinking delays that learning. Delay increases pressure. Pressure increases fear. Fear increases thinking. The loop tightens. Overthinking also steals presence. Philosophy teaches that effective action happens now. Overthinking pulls attention into the future. You miss opportunities available in the present moment. Progress happens step by step, not all at once. Overthinking tries to solve the entire journey before taking the first step. Life does not work that way. You can only move from where you are. Breaking free from overthinking requires redefining usefulness. Philosophy teaches that useful thinking leads to action. Thinking that does not lead to action is noise. Asking, "What is the smallest step I can take now?" cuts through mental clutter. Small steps weaken overthinking because they replace speculation with movement. Movement restores confidence. Another way out is trusting learning over certainty. Philosophy teaches that certainty is not required for progress. Learning is. When you act, you learn. When you learn, fear decreases. When fear decreases, thinking quiets. Progress accelerates naturally. Overthinking ends when action begins. Philosophy teaches that clarity follows movement, not the other way around. When you move, the mind aligns. When you wait, the mind spins. Progress belongs to those who act with incomplete information and adjust along the way. Ultimately, overthinking destroys progress because it mistakes mental activity for growth. Philosophy teaches that growth is lived, not imagined. When you stop asking your mind for permission and start using it as a tool, progress resumes. Action becomes teacher, thinking becomes servant, and life moves forward again. Chapter 6. Learning to separate yourself from your thoughts. Learning to separate yourself from your thoughts begins with realizing a simple truth. Thoughts appear, but they are not who you are. Philosophy teaches that most suffering comes from confusion between the observer and the content being observed. A thought arises fear, doubt, judgment, and immediately you claim it as you. I am afraid. I am failing. I am not enough. But a thought is an event, not an identity. It comes and goes like weather. You are the sky, not the storm. The moment you see this distinction, space appears. In that space, control begins to return. Thoughts gain power because they speak in your own voice. Philosophy teaches that familiarity creates trust. Because thoughts sound like you, they feel authoritative. You rarely question them. Yet if the same words came from someone else, you would challenge them. Separation means learning to listen without obeying. You notice a thought without acting on it. This noticing weakens its grip. Awareness interrupts automatic belief. What is observed loses its ability to dominate unconsciously. Separating from thoughts also requires slowing down identification. Philosophy teaches that identification is instant. A thought appears and identity forms around it. I'm anxious becomes I am an anxious person. This leap happens so fast it feels natural. Separation slows the leap. You begin saying, there is anxiety, instead of, I am anxious. Language matters. This shift changes relationship. You stop drowning in emotion and start relating to it. Relationship implies distance. Distance restores balance. Thoughts also control behavior by predicting outcomes. Philosophy teaches that the mind constantly simulates futures. These simulations feel real, but they are guesses. When you separate from thought, you stop treating prediction as fact. You allow uncertainty to exist without panic. This tolerance weakens fear-based thinking. Fear survives on belief. Without belief, it fades. Separation dissolves fear at the root. Another key aspect is recognizing repetition. Philosophy teaches that recurring thoughts are habits, not truths. If a thought repeats often, it feels important. In reality, it is just well practiced. Separation allows you to see repetition without reinforcement. You notice the same thought returning and say, "This again." That recognition breaks the cycle. Habits weaken when they are seen clearly. Unseen habits run lives. Separating from thoughts also restores emotional freedom. Philosophy teaches that emotion follows belief. When you believe every thought, emotion spikes. When belief loosens, emotion softens. You still feel, but feelings pass faster. You stop amplifying them with story. Emotion becomes information, not command. This change reduces suffering dramatically. Life feels lighter not because problems vanish, but because identification dissolves. Thoughts also shape self-image. Philosophy teaches that identity is built from repeated inner statements. "I'm not confident. I always mess up." Separation interrupts this construction. You see these statements as commentary, not truth. Identity becomes flexible. Flexibility allows growth. Rigid identity traps you. Separation loosens the trap. Another benefit is clarity. Philosophy teaches that clear seeing requires mental quiet. When you are lost in thought, perception narrows. When you step back, perception widens. You see options, patterns, and timing more accurately. Decisions improve. Reaction decreases. Response replaces impulse. Separation sharpens intelligence. Separating from thoughts also improves relationships. Philosophy teaches that many conflicts are between thoughts, not people. You react to assumptions, interpretations, and imagined intentions. When you separate, you respond to what is actually said and done. This reduces misunderstanding. Communication becomes cleaner. Drama fades. Presence replaces projection. Another aspect is freedom from comparison. Philosophy teaches that comparison is a thought habit. When you separate from it, its authority dissolves. You see comparison as noise, not instruction. Self-worth stabilizes. Motivation becomes intrinsic. You act from purpose, not insecurity. Separation protects dignity. Thoughts also fuel urgency. Philosophy teaches that urgency is mental, not real. Separation slows internal time. Slower time allows better judgment. You stop rushing into mistakes. Patience emerges naturally. Patience strengthens outcomes. Separating from thoughts strengthens resilience. Philosophy teaches that resilience comes from perspective. When thoughts lose dominance, setbacks hurt less. You recover faster. You learn instead of collapse. Strength grows quietly. Another powerful effect is restored choice. Philosophy teaches that choice disappears when thought dominates. Separation reopens choice. You decide which thoughts deserve attention. Attention is power. Power returns to you. Separation also reveals stillness. Philosophy teaches that beneath thought is silence. This silence is not emptiness, it is awareness. Awareness feels grounded and steady. From this place, life is met calmly. Problems shrink, confidence stabilizes. Thought separation does not silence the mind. Philosophy teaches that the goal is not silence, but clarity. Thoughts continue, but they no longer rule. They advise, not command. You listen selectively. Ultimately, learning to separate yourself from your thoughts means reclaiming authorship of your life. Philosophy teaches that freedom is not controlling thought, but not being controlled by it. When thoughts lose their authority, presence takes over. And from presence, life is lived directly, not through the noise of the mind. Separating yourself from your thoughts deepens when you realize that thoughts are reactions, not commands. Philosophy teaches that the mind reacts to memory, conditioning, and emotion automatically. A thought appears before you invite it. This alone proves it is not you. If you were the thinker, you would choose every thought. Yet many thoughts arrive unwanted, intrusive, and repetitive. Separation begins by acknowledging this lack of authorship. You did not choose the thought, so why obey it? This realization weakens blind loyalty to the mind. Loyalty shifts from thought to awareness. Another step in separation is recognizing emotional coloring. Philosophy teaches that thoughts often borrow strength from emotion. A fearful thought feels urgent. A sad thought feels heavy. Emotion convinces you the thought is important. Separation means noticing emotion without letting it validate the thought. Feeling fear does not mean danger is real. Feeling sadness does not mean something is wrong. Emotion is a signal, not a verdict. When emotion is seen clearly, it loses power to command belief. You feel without surrendering. Separating from thoughts also requires patience. Philosophy teaches that the mind resists being observed. When you first try to watch thoughts, they may increase. This is normal. The mind senses loss of control and reacts. Separation is not forceful suppression, it is steady observation. Over time, thoughts settle naturally. Resistance fuels noise. Observation quiets it. Patience allows the process to unfold. Another layer of separation comes through naming. Philosophy teaches that naming creates distance. When a thought appears, label it simply planning, worrying, judging. Do not analyze content. Just recognize the type. This shifts you from participant to observer. The thought loses personal weight. It becomes an object, not a truth. Objects can be examined without obedience. Separating from thoughts also changes your relationship with time. Philosophy teaches that thoughts pull you into past or future. Awareness lives now. When you separate, attention returns to the present. The present moment is always simpler than thought suggests. Problems shrink when experienced directly. Separation grounds you in reality instead of imagination. Another effect is reduced self-criticism. Philosophy teaches that harsh inner dialogue is learned, not natural. Separation reveals that the critical voice is not wisdom, but conditioning. Once seen, its authority collapses. You stop punishing yourself mentally. Compassion replaces judgment. Compassion stabilizes emotion. Stability supports growth. Thought separation also strengthens courage. Philosophy teaches that fear-based thoughts lose power when not believed. You still feel fear, but it no longer decides. Action becomes possible despite discomfort. Courage is not absence of fear, it is refusal to obey it. Separation makes this refusal easier. Another benefit is improved focus. Philosophy teaches that multitasking is mental fragmentation. Thoughts pull attention in many directions. Separation reunifies attention. Focus sharpens. Tasks feel lighter. Progress accelerates. Clarity emerges naturally when noise fades. Separating from thoughts also improves sleep. Philosophy teaches that rumination keeps the nervous system active. When thoughts are observed instead of followed, they lose momentum. The body relaxes. Rest deepens. Energy restores. This physical benefit reinforces mental clarity. Thought separation reduces anxiety. Philosophy teaches that anxiety lives in imagined futures. Separation prevents full immersion in those futures. You see anxiety as a mental event, not a prophecy. Its intensity drops. Calm becomes accessible again. Another transformation is improved decision-making. Philosophy teaches that decisions made from thought overload are distorted. Separation clears space. From space, intuition speaks. Intuition guides timing and direction subtly. Listening becomes easier when noise is reduced. Separating from thoughts also strengthens boundaries. Philosophy teaches that many boundary violations happen internally first. You agree mentally before you act. Separation allows you to notice this internal agreement. You pause, you choose. External boundaries follow internal clarity. Another effect is resilience. Philosophy teaches that resilience comes from perspective. When thoughts lose dominance, setbacks are processed without collapse. You learn, adapt, and move forward. Emotional recovery speeds up. Life feels less fragile. Separating from thoughts also dissolves unnecessary guilt. Philosophy teaches that guilt often comes from imagined expectations. Separation reveals these expectations as thoughts, not obligations. You act from values instead of fear. Freedom increases. Thought separation does not remove thinking. Philosophy teaches that thinking remains useful when it is conscious. You think when needed, then return to awareness. Thought becomes tool, not master. This balance restores harmony. Another stage of separation is silence appreciation. Philosophy teaches that silence is not empty. It is alive with awareness. In silence, you feel grounded, present, and clear. This state becomes familiar. Thoughts lose urgency because silence feels safe. Separating from thoughts ultimately restores choice. Philosophy teaches that freedom is choice in the presence of impulse. When thoughts arise and you do not react automatically, you reclaim authorship. Life shifts from reaction to intention. Finally, learning to separate yourself from your thoughts means living directly. Philosophy teaches that most suffering comes from living in commentary instead of experience. When commentary quiets, life becomes vivid, simple, and real. You are no longer trapped in the mind. You are awake within it. Chapter 7. How Awareness Breaks Mental Control. Awareness breaks mental control because it turns unconscious patterns into visible processes. Philosophy teaches that the mind only dominates when it operates unseen. When thoughts run automatically, they shape emotion and behavior without resistance. Awareness interrupts this automation. The moment you notice a thought, it loses the power to command you blindly. It is no longer the driver. It becomes an object you can observe. This shift is subtle but transformative. Control weakens not through force, but through clarity. What you see clearly can no longer control you silently. Awareness is the light that exposes hidden mechanisms. Mental control thrives on identification. Philosophy teaches that suffering intensifies when you believe every thought represents truth or identity. Awareness creates separation. You no longer say, "This is me," but "This is happening in me." That distance dissolves domination. Thoughts continue to appear, but they stop defining you. Emotion still arises, but it no longer overwhelms. Awareness acts like a buffer between stimulus and response. In that buffer, choice appears. Choice is freedom in action. Without awareness, there is only reaction. Awareness breaks control by slowing internal time. Philosophy teaches that the mind operates at speed. Thoughts jump rapidly from one idea to another, creating urgency. Awareness slows this momentum. When you notice the mind racing, the race weakens. Slower internal time allows perspective. Perspective reduces emotional intensity. Reduced intensity restores balance. Balance returns authority to you. The mind cannot dominate a calm observer. Another way awareness breaks mental control is by exposing repetition. Philosophy teaches that repeated thoughts feel convincing because they are familiar. Awareness reveals repetition as habit, not truth. You notice the same worry, doubt, or criticism returning again and again. Once seen, repetition loses credibility. You stop engaging with it emotionally. Engagement feeds control. Observation starves it. Over time, repeated patterns fade from lack of attention. Awareness also breaks control by grounding you in the present. Philosophy teaches that mental domination pulls you into past regret or future fear. Awareness anchors attention in now. In the present, most imagined problems disappear. Reality becomes simpler. Simplicity weakens anxiety. Anxiety fuels mental control. When attention stays present, the mind has less material to manipulate. Awareness restores contact with what is actually happening, not what might happen. Another function of awareness is emotional regulation. Philosophy teaches that emotion escalates when it is resisted or ignored. Awareness allows emotion to be felt without judgment. Feeling without resistance shortens emotional cycles. Short cycles prevent build-up. Without build-up, explosions decrease. Calm replaces volatility. Calm minds are difficult to control. Awareness neutralizes emotional hijacking. Awareness also dissolves false urgency. Philosophy teaches that urgency is often manufactured by thought. Awareness questions urgency. Is this truly urgent, or does it feel urgent? This question alone weakens compulsion. Many actions can wait. Waiting reveals clarity. Clarity improves decisions. Improved decisions reduce regret. Regret feeds mental loops. Awareness stops the loop early. Another way awareness breaks control is by changing language. Philosophy teaches that inner language shapes experience. Awareness notices harsh, absolute, or catastrophic self-talk. Once noticed, language softens naturally. Softer language creates emotional space. Space restores calm. Calm reduces reactivity. Awareness transforms internal dialogue without forcing positivity. It simply removes exaggeration. Awareness also strengthens self-trust. Philosophy teaches that trust grows when you witness your ability to handle experience. Awareness shows you that thoughts and emotions pass on their own. You survive discomfort without collapsing. This realization builds confidence. Confidence weakens fear. Fear strengthens mental control. Awareness reverses the chain. Another benefit of awareness is improved focus. Philosophy teaches that mental control scatters attention. Awareness reunifies it. When you notice distraction, focus returns naturally. Focus increases effectiveness. Effectiveness reduces frustration. Frustration fuels overthinking. Awareness simplifies effort. Awareness breaks control by revealing choice. Philosophy teaches that without awareness, behavior is automatic. Awareness inserts choice into habit. You choose whether to engage with a thought or let it pass. Each choice strengthens agency. Agency is the opposite of mental domination. The more choices you make consciously, the weaker unconscious patterns become. Another aspect is boundary awareness. Philosophy teaches that many boundary violations happen internally before externally. Awareness catches the internal yes given out of fear. Catching it allows correction. External boundaries strengthen naturally. Boundaries protect energy. Protected energy supports clarity. Clarity resists manipulation. Awareness also dissolves comparison. Philosophy teaches that comparison is a thought habit. Awareness reveals it as unnecessary. When comparison is seen clearly, it loses emotional grip. Self-worth stabilizes. Stable self-worth reduces reactivity. Reactivity fuels control. Awareness ends the cycle. Awareness also increases resilience. Philosophy teaches that resilience comes from perspective. Awareness provides perspective by widening attention. Setbacks are seen as events, not identities. Learning replaces collapse. Recovery speeds up. Faster recovery prevents mental spirals. Awareness strengthens adaptability. Another powerful effect is silence. Philosophy teaches that beneath thought is quiet awareness. This quiet is steady and grounded. Spending time in awareness familiarizes you with this silence. Silence becomes safe. When silence is safe, the mind loses urgency. Awareness replaces noise with presence. Awareness does not eliminate thought. Philosophy teaches that the goal is not a silent mind, but a conscious relationship with it. Thoughts become tools rather than masters. You think when needed, then return to awareness. This flexibility is freedom. Ultimately, awareness breaks mental control because it restores authorship. Philosophy teaches that freedom is not controlling the mind, but not being controlled by it. When awareness is present, the mind serves instead of rules. Life becomes lived directly, clearly, and deliberately. Awareness continues breaking mental control by revealing how thoughts arise without invitation. Philosophy teaches that if a thought appears on its own, it cannot be the core of who you are. Awareness notices this spontaneous arrival. A fear appears, a memory appears, a judgment appears. None of them were chosen. Seeing this repeatedly weakens attachment. You stop defending thoughts as truth. They become events passing through consciousness. When thoughts lose ownership, control dissolves. The mind can no longer rule through illusion of authorship. Awareness also breaks control by exposing emotional momentum. Philosophy teaches that emotions grow when unnoticed. Awareness interrupts escalation early. You feel irritation before it becomes anger. You feel tension before it becomes anxiety. Catching emotion early prevents explosion. Prevention is easier than repair. Awareness becomes a stabilizing force that protects clarity. Mental control thrives on escalation. Awareness stops it at the root. Another powerful function of awareness is pattern recognition. Philosophy teaches that the mind repeats familiar reactions. Awareness identifies these patterns. You notice how the same triggers produce the same responses. Recognition removes surprise. Surprise fuels loss of control. When patterns are seen, response becomes optional. Optional response is freedom. The mind loses power when its strategies are predictable. Awareness also breaks control by dissolving inner conflict. Philosophy teaches that control increases when the mind argues with itself. One thought says act, another says wait. Awareness observes both without choosing immediately. This observation reduces tension. Tension clouds judgment. Calm observation clarifies direction. Awareness resolves conflict through understanding, not force. Awareness neutralizes fear by removing exaggeration. Philosophy teaches that fear thrives on imagination. Awareness brings attention back to present sensation. Present sensation is rarely catastrophic. The body is breathing, the ground is stable, reality is manageable. Fear shrinks when imagination loses dominance. Awareness grounds perception, in fact, not fantasy. Another way awareness breaks control is by restoring emotional neutrality. Philosophy teaches that neutrality is not indifference, it is balance. Awareness allows emotions to pass without labeling them as good or bad. Without judgment, emotions complete their cycle quickly. Quick completion prevents build-up. Without build-up, the mind loses leverage. Emotional neutrality stabilizes behavior. Awareness also reveals false narratives. Philosophy teaches that the mind constructs stories to explain discomfort. Awareness questions these stories gently. Is this story accurate, or is it habit? Questioning weakens belief. Weakened belief reduces emotional grip. Awareness dissolves stories without confrontation. Another effect of awareness is improved self-compassion. Philosophy teaches that harsh self-judgment strengthens mental control. Awareness notices this judgment without agreeing. Compassion emerges naturally when judgment is seen clearly. Compassion softens resistance. Softened resistance calms the nervous system. Calm resists manipulation. Awareness heals internally. Awareness also restores patience. Philosophy teaches that impatience is mental pressure. Awareness notices the urge to rush. Noticing reduces urgency. Reduced urgency improves timing. Better timing improves outcomes. Awareness replaces haste with precision. Precision strengthens confidence. Confidence weakens control. Awareness also breaks control by revealing that thoughts contradict each other. Philosophy teaches that the mind is inconsistent. One moment it predicts failure, the next it imagines success. Awareness sees this inconsistency. Seeing inconsistency reduces trust in thought authority. When authority collapses, obedience ends. Another function of awareness is attention management. Philosophy teaches that attention feeds thought. Awareness chooses where attention rests. When attention is withdrawn from unhelpful thought, thought fades. Starved thoughts lose power. Attention becomes currency again. Control returns to the observer. Awareness also sharpens intuition. Philosophy teaches that intuition is subtle and easily drowned out. Awareness quiets mental noise. In quiet, intuition becomes noticeable. Intuition guides action efficiently. Efficient action reduces regret. Reduced regret stabilizes identity. Awareness strengthens inner guidance. Awareness also dissolves shame. Philosophy teaches that shame thrives in secrecy. Awareness brings hidden feelings into light. Light reduces distortion. Distortion fuels suffering. Awareness allows acceptance. Acceptance ends inner punishment. Without punishment, the mind loses one of its strongest control tools. Awareness strengthens resilience by reframing failure. Philosophy teaches that failure becomes devastating when identified with. Awareness sees failure as event, not identity. Learning replaces self-attack. Recovery accelerates. Faster recovery prevents mental spirals. Awareness keeps perspective intact. Another benefit is increased authenticity. Philosophy teaches that control forces conformity. Awareness reveals when behavior is driven by fear rather than truth. When seen, alignment becomes possible. Acting from alignment reduces inner conflict. Reduced conflict stabilizes emotion. Stability resists control. Awareness also creates silence. Philosophy teaches that silence is awareness without thought. In silence, there is no narrative to dominate. Spending time in silence weakens mental authority. Silence becomes familiar. Familiar silence becomes refuge. Control dissolves naturally. Awareness does not eliminate challenge. Philosophy teaches that challenge remains, but suffering decreases. When awareness is present, challenge is met cleanly. Clean engagement produces growth. Growth builds confidence. Confidence weakens fear. Fear loses control. Ultimately, awareness breaks mental control by returning life to direct experience. Philosophy teaches that domination ends when observation begins. Awareness replaces reaction with choice. Choice restores freedom. Freedom becomes stable ground. From that ground, the mind serves instead of rules, and life unfolds with clarity and calm. Chapter 8. Training the mind instead of obeying it. Training the mind instead of obeying it begins with a clear realization: the mind is a tool, not a leader. Philosophy teaches that problems arise when tools are mistaken for authorities. The mind produces thoughts constantly, but production does not equal wisdom. When you obey every thought, you surrender direction. Training the mind means reversing this relationship. You decide when to listen and when to ignore. This shift restores agency. The mind becomes useful instead of dominant. Training is not suppression, it is guidance. You do not silence the mind, you educate it through behavior and attention. The mind learns through repetition, not logic. Philosophy teaches that the mind does not change because you argue with it, but because you show it new outcomes. When you act despite fear, the mind updates its model of reality. It learns that fear does not equal danger. When you pause instead of reacting, the mind learns restraint. Obedience reinforces old patterns. Training rewires them. Each conscious action teaches the mind what is acceptable. Over time, the mind adapts to your leadership. Training the mind begins with delaying response. Philosophy teaches that impulse is the mind's fastest command. When a thought urges immediate action, training means pausing. Even a brief pause weakens impulsive authority. In that pause, awareness checks alignment. Is this thought useful or habitual? This questioning interrupts automation. Repeated pauses form discipline. Discipline trains the mind to wait for instruction instead of issuing orders. Another method of training is selective attention. Philosophy teaches that attention is the mind's fuel. When you give attention to worry, it grows. When you withdraw attention, it fades. Training means feeding thoughts that support growth and starving those that don't. This is not denial, it is prioritization. Over time, the mind produces fewer unhelpful thoughts because they receive no reward. Attention teaches preference. Training also involves emotional regulation. Philosophy teaches that emotion amplifies thought. When emotion spikes, the mind feels urgent. Training means learning to feel emotion without acting on it. You let emotion move through without obeying its message. This teaches the mind that emotion is tolerable. Tolerable emotion loses control power. The mind becomes calmer because it no longer needs to protect you from feeling. The mind is trained through consistency. Philosophy teaches that inconsistent leadership confuses the mind. When sometimes you obey fear and sometimes you don't, the mind keeps testing. Consistent calm responses retrain expectation. The mind learns new rules through predictability. Predictable discipline builds trust. The mind begins to cooperate instead of resist. Another training method is reframing failure. Philosophy teaches that the mind avoids pain. When failure is treated as catastrophe, the mind resists action. Training reframes failure as feedback. Each failure becomes data. The mind learns that mistakes are survivable. Survival weakens avoidance. Avoidance fades. Action increases. The mind adapts to growth. Training also requires simplifying commands. Philosophy teaches that the mind struggles with complexity. Clear, simple intentions work better. One step at a time trains patience. Progress over perfection trains resilience. Simple guidance reduces confusion. Confusion feeds overthinking. Clarity quiets it. Another aspect is physical discipline. Philosophy teaches that the mind follows the body. Regular sleep, movement, and breath control stabilize thought. Training the body trains the mind indirectly. A regulated nervous system produces fewer extreme thoughts. Discipline in action creates calm in thinking. Training the mind also involves language awareness. Philosophy teaches that inner language programs emotional response. Replacing absolute language with accurate language retrains perception. This is difficult instead of this is impossible. Accuracy reduces fear. Fear weakens obedience. The mind becomes more rational through language discipline. Another training principle is exposure. Philosophy teaches that avoidance strengthens fear. Gradual exposure weakens it. Doing what the mind resists teaches resilience. Each exposure expands tolerance. Tolerance reduces alarm. The mind recalibrates threat assessment. Control shifts. Training also requires patience with relapse. Philosophy teaches that habits fade slowly. Old thoughts return during stress. Training is responding differently, not eliminating thought. Each new response reinforces leadership. Progress is cumulative. The mind learns through repetition over time. Training the mind improves confidence. Philosophy teaches that confidence grows through proof. Proof comes from action. Each act of leadership builds trust between you and your mind. The mind stops questioning your capability. Doubt decreases naturally. Training the mind also strengthens focus. Philosophy teaches that focus improves with boundaries. Limiting distractions trains attention, endurance. Endurance reduces mental wandering. Wandering feeds obedience. Focus reinforces authority. Another result is emotional independence. Philosophy teaches that trained minds do not rely on external validation. Inner stability replaces approval-seeking. Stability resists manipulation. The mind becomes grounded. Training the mind does not mean control through force. Philosophy teaches that force creates resistance. Training through calm repetition creates alignment. Alignment replaces struggle. The mind becomes ally, not adversary. Ultimately, training the mind instead of obeying it restores sovereignty. Philosophy teaches that freedom is disciplined awareness in action. When the mind serves awareness, life becomes intentional. Thoughts assist rather than rule. Progress accelerates. Calm deepens. You move through life as the author, not the passenger. Training the mind deepens when you stop trying to convince it and start proving through action. Philosophy teaches that the mind does not respond well to arguments, but it responds immediately to evidence. When you repeatedly act against fear, hesitation, or doubt, the mind updates its beliefs. It learns from outcomes, not explanations. Each time you move forward despite discomfort, you show the mind that its warnings are not absolute. This weakens its authority. Over time, the mind begins to trust your leadership because reality confirms it. Training happens through lived experience, not inner debate. Another essential part of training the mind is learning to sit with discomfort. Philosophy teaches that the mind obeys comfort above all else. When discomfort appears, the mind urges escape. Training means staying present without reacting. You feel the discomfort fully without labeling it as danger. This rewires the mind's association. Discomfort stops meaning threat. Once that association breaks, the mind relaxes. Many limits disappear simply because discomfort is no longer feared. Training replaces avoidance with tolerance. Tolerance becomes strength. Training the mind also requires reducing negotiation. Philosophy teaches that the mind loves bargaining. I'll start tomorrow. Just this once. Each negotiation weakens authority. Training means clear rules. When a rule is set, it is followed calmly. No drama, no inner debate. Consistency trains obedience. The mind learns boundaries through repetition. Without consistency, training fails. Leadership must be predictable to be respected. Another method is using structure. Philosophy teaches that unstructured minds wander easily. Structure provides direction. Simple routines, waking times, work blocks, reflection periods reduce mental chaos. Chaos invites obedience to impulse. Structure limits impulse. Over time, the mind adapts to structure and produces fewer distractions. Training the environment supports training the mind. Training also involves redefining success. Philosophy teaches that the mind avoids tasks when success feels distant or overwhelming. Training breaks goals into small wins. Each completed action reinforces competence. Competence builds confidence. Confidence reduces resistance. The mind begins associating effort with reward instead of fear. Progress accelerates naturally. Another powerful tool is observation without judgment. Philosophy teaches that judgment creates inner conflict. Conflict drains energy. Training means noticing thoughts without labeling them as good or bad. Neutral observation removes emotional charge. Without charge, thoughts lose urgency. The mind quiets. Calm replaces struggle. Training becomes gentle, not forceful. Training the mind also requires letting go of immediate gratification. Philosophy teaches that the mind seeks quick rewards. Training means delaying reward consciously. Delayed gratification strengthens discipline. Discipline increases self-respect. Self-respect reinforces authority. Authority reduces internal chaos. The cycle strengthens leadership from within. Another aspect is intentional rest. Philosophy teaches that exhaustion weakens control. A tired mind seeks comfort and reacts impulsively. Training includes rest as discipline, not indulgence. Rest restores clarity. Clarity strengthens decision-making. A rested mind obeys guidance more easily. Training fails without recovery. Training the mind also involves redefining fear. Philosophy teaches that fear is information, not instruction. Training means listening without obeying. You acknowledge fear, then act according to values. Each time fear is present, but not followed, its influence weakens. Fear learns it no longer controls behavior. Over time, fear becomes quieter and less frequent. Another training practice is reflection. Philosophy teaches that reflection turns experience into wisdom. After action, you reflect calmly. What worked? What didn't? No self-attack. Just learning. This feedback loop trains intelligence. The mind begins to optimize behavior instead of resisting it. Reflection replaces rumination. Training the mind also includes reducing stimulation. Philosophy teaches that constant stimulation fragments attention. Fragmented attention weakens control. Training means creating periods of silence, boredom, or simplicity. In these spaces, the mind learns to settle. Settled minds are easier to guide. Overstimulated minds rebel. Another principle is value alignment. Philosophy teaches that the mind resists actions that conflict with values. Training clarifies values. When actions align with values, resistance decreases. The mind cooperates. Motivation becomes internal. Training becomes effortless. Training the mind also strengthens emotional maturity. Philosophy teaches that immature minds seek expression. Trained minds seek effectiveness. You stop venting and start choosing responses. Emotional control becomes natural. Natural control is stable. Another benefit of training is identity shift. Philosophy teaches that identity follows behavior. When you train the mind consistently, identity updates. You begin to see yourself as disciplined, calm, and capable. This identity reinforces future behavior. Training becomes self-sustaining. Training the mind also improves resilience under pressure. Philosophy teaches that trained minds recover faster. Setbacks do not derail progress. You adjust and continue. Continuity strengthens confidence. Confidence stabilizes performance. Another advanced stage of training is trust. Philosophy teaches that once the mind sees consistent leadership, it relaxes. It stops questioning every move. Inner resistance fades. Cooperation replaces conflict. The mind becomes ally. Ultimately, training the mind instead of obeying it transforms life from reaction to intention. Philosophy teaches that mastery is not force, but clarity repeated over time. When awareness leads and the mind follows, progress becomes steady, calm, and unstoppable. Chapter 9. Rewriting the inner voice that holds you back. Rewriting the inner voice that holds you back begins with realizing that this voice was learned, not born. Philosophy teaches that no one enters life speaking harshly to themselves. The critical inner voice is formed through repetition, experience, and survival. At some point, this voice helped you adapt. It warned you, corrected you, and kept you alert. Over time, however, it stopped protecting and started limiting. What once guarded you now cages you. Understanding this removes shame. You are not broken, you are conditioned. And what is conditioned can be rewritten. The inner voice gains power because it sounds familiar. Philosophy teaches that familiarity creates trust. Because this voice speaks in your own tone, you believe it. You can't. You're not ready. This will fail. These statements feel factual, but they are interpretations, not truths. Rewriting begins by questioning authority. You do not silence the voice, you examine it. Who taught it to speak this way? What evidence supports its claims? Often, there is none. The voice repeats old conclusions long after circumstances have changed. Another step in rewriting is changing identification. Philosophy teaches that most people say, "I am my thoughts." This makes the inner voice feel permanent. Separation weakens it. You begin to say, "This is a thought I'm having." That shift creates space. In space, choice appears. You are no longer trapped inside the voice. You are listening to it from outside. Listeners can choose. Prisoners cannot. This distinction changes everything. The inner voice also holds you back by exaggerating risk. Philosophy teaches that fear speaks louder than truth. The voice predicts worst-case outcomes to keep you safe. But safety without growth becomes stagnation. Rewriting does not remove caution. It restores proportion. You replace catastrophic language with accurate language. This might be uncomfortable. Instead of "this will ruin me," accuracy weakens fear. Fear loses control when exaggeration ends. Another way to rewrite the inner voice is through evidence-based thinking. Philosophy teaches that the mind responds to proof. You begin collecting evidence that contradicts the voice. Moments you acted despite fear, times you survived failure, situations where you adapted. Each piece of evidence weakens the old narrative. Over time, the voice loses credibility. Credibility determines influence. Without it, the voice softens. The inner voice is also shaped by repetition. Philosophy teaches that what is repeated becomes default. Rewriting requires new repetition. You consciously practice new inner statements grounded in truth, not fantasy, not blind positivity, but realistic encouragement. I can handle this. I don't need certainty to begin. Progress matters more than perfection. Repetition builds new pathways. New pathways weaken old ones. The mind adapts to what you practice. Rewriting also involves emotional tone. Philosophy teaches that the tone of inner speech affects nervous system response. Harsh tones create tension. Gentle tones create safety. Safety allows courage. You learn to speak to yourself as you would to someone you respect. This is not indulgence, it is discipline. Harshness does not produce excellence, stability does. Another crucial step is recognizing when the inner voice is outdated. Philosophy teaches that the voice often reflects a younger version of you. It formed when you had fewer resources, less power, and less understanding. Rewriting means updating it. You are no longer who you were when that voice formed. Your capacity has grown. Your experience has expanded. The voice must evolve or be replaced. The inner voice also holds you back by personalizing setbacks. Philosophy teaches that failure becomes destructive when it attacks identity. Rewriting shifts language from identity to event. "I failed" becomes "this attempt didn't work." This preserves self-worth while allowing learning. Learning replaces shame. Shame fuels the old voice. Learning silences it. Another technique is responding instead of reacting. Philosophy teaches that you do not have to accept every inner statement. When the voice criticizes, you respond calmly. Not with argument, but with clarity. That's not helpful. That's fear speaking. This response trains authority. The voice learns it is no longer in charge. Rewriting also requires patience. Philosophy teaches that deeply ingrained voices fade gradually. Expecting instant silence creates frustration. Frustration strengthens the critic. Consistency weakens it. Each time you choose awareness over obedience, progress occurs. Progress compounds quietly. The inner voice also changes through action. Philosophy teaches that behavior reshapes belief. When you act contrary to the voice and survive, its warnings lose power. Action rewrites narrative faster than thought alone. Movement teaches the mind what is possible. Another part of rewriting is self-forgiveness. Philosophy teaches that guilt keeps the old voice alive. Forgiveness dissolves the emotional charge that feeds it. You acknowledge mistakes without punishment. Without punishment, the voice loses fuel. Rewriting the inner voice also restores confidence. Philosophy teaches that confidence grows through self-trust. When your inner voice supports effort instead of attacking it, trust forms. You become willing to try again. Trying again is growth. Another result is clarity. Philosophy teaches that mental noise decreases when the voice softens. Decisions become easier. Hesitation decreases. Focus improves. The inner environment becomes cooperative instead of hostile. Ultimately, rewriting the inner voice that holds you back is reclaiming authorship of your inner world. Philosophy teaches that freedom begins internally. When the voice shifts from critic to guide, resistance fades. You move forward not because fear disappeared, but because it no longer decides. Rewriting the inner voice goes deeper when you realize that this voice is not logical. It is emotional memory speaking. Philosophy teaches that the mind records emotional experiences more strongly than facts. A moment of embarrassment, rejection, or failure can imprint a tone that lasts for years. The inner voice repeats that tone, not because it is accurate, but because it remembers how pain felt. Rewriting begins when you stop arguing with the voice intellectually and start understanding its emotional origin. Compassion dissolves what logic cannot. When you understand why the voice exists, you stop fighting it and start transforming it. Another important step is noticing timing. Philosophy teaches that the inner voice becomes loudest right before growth. When you are about to change, stretch, or risk something meaningful, the voice activates aggressively. It is not coincidence. The voice is triggered by uncertainty. It interprets the unfamiliar as danger. Recognizing this pattern weakens its credibility. Instead of believing the voice, you see it as a sign that you are approaching something important. The voice stops being a stop sign and becomes a signal of expansion. The inner voice also feeds on fatigue. Philosophy teaches that exhaustion lowers mental defenses. When you are tired, stressed, or overwhelmed, the voice becomes harsher and more convincing. Rewriting includes learning to rest deliberately. Rest is not avoidance, it is maintenance. A rested nervous system resists negative inner narratives more easily. Many people try to fix the voice while exhausted, which makes it stronger. Strength returns first through recovery, then through correction. Another way to rewrite the inner voice is by changing what you reward. Philosophy teaches that attention is reinforcement. When you dwell on critical thoughts, you reward them. When you redirect attention to action or presence, you withdraw reward. The voice fades when it no longer receives attention. This is not suppression, it is redirection. Over time, the mind produces fewer critical thoughts because they no longer lead anywhere. Rewriting also requires changing your definition of strength. Philosophy teaches that many inner voices were shaped by environments where harshness was mistaken for discipline. You were taught that being hard on yourself would make you better. In reality, it made you afraid. True strength is not self-punishment, it is consistency. Consistency grows from encouragement, not attack. When the inner voice becomes supportive but firm, discipline improves. You do more, not less. The inner voice often holds you back by predicting social rejection. Philosophy teaches that humans are wired for belonging. The voice uses this need to control behavior. They'll judge you. You'll look stupid. Rewriting means challenging the assumption that approval equals safety. You learn that discomfort does not equal exclusion. Even when rejection happens, survival continues. This realization weakens fear-based self-talk dramatically. Another aspect of rewriting is altering internal questions. Philosophy teaches that questions shape focus. The inner voice often asks, "What if I fail?" You consciously replace this with, "What can I learn?" Learning-oriented questions redirect energy from fear to growth. Growth weakens the old narrative. Questions become tools instead of traps. The inner voice also feeds on comparison. Philosophy teaches that comparison invites self-attack. Rewriting means returning attention to personal progress. You measure yourself against yesterday, not against others. Progress-focused thinking builds confidence. Confidence quiets the critic. The voice loses relevance when you stop competing internally. Rewriting the inner voice also involves changing posture and breath. Philosophy teaches that body and mind are linked. Slouched posture and shallow breathing reinforce negative self-talk. Upright posture and steady breath communicate safety to the nervous system. Safety softens the voice. This physical intervention may seem simple, but it is powerful. The body often rewrites the mind faster than words. Another key practice is catching absolutes. Philosophy teaches that the inner voice uses extreme language. Always, never, everyone, no one. Rewriting replaces absolutes with specifics. This didn't work, instead of nothing ever works. Specific language restores realism. Realism reduces emotional intensity. Intensity feeds the critic. Accuracy starves it. The inner voice also holds you back by confusing feelings with facts. Philosophy teaches that feelings change, facts remain. Rewriting means acknowledging feelings without turning them into conclusions. "I feel unsure" is not "I am incapable." This distinction protects self-worth. Self-worth is the foundation of courage. Rewriting also strengthens boundaries with yourself. Philosophy teaches that you teach others how to treat you, and you teach yourself first. When you refuse to tolerate abusive inner language, standards rise. You stop allowing mental harm. This boundary shifts identity. You become someone who protects their inner world. Another transformation is emotional regulation. Philosophy teaches that when the voice softens, emotions stabilize. Stable emotions improve judgment. Better judgment leads to better outcomes. Better outcomes reinforce positive self-talk. The cycle reverses in your favor. Rewriting the inner voice also increases persistence. Philosophy teaches that many people quit not because tasks are hard, but because the voice is cruel. When the voice becomes supportive, you stay longer. Staying longer produces mastery. Mastery silences doubt. Another effect is authenticity. Philosophy teaches that harsh inner voices force people to perform. When the voice softens, you act honestly. Honest action aligns with values. Alignment produces peace. Peace qui est mentale noise. Ultimately, rewriting the inner voice that holds you back is not about becoming confident overnight. Philosophy teaches that it is about becoming fair to yourself. Fairness creates stability. Stability creates courage. Courage creates progress. And progress, repeated, rewrites the voice completely. Chapter 10. Taking back control of your direction. Taking back control of your direction begins with accepting that drift is not accidental. Philosophy teaches that when direction is unclear, something else decides for you: habit, fear, comfort, or expectation. Most people believe life just happened to them, but life follows attention. Where attention goes repeatedly, direction forms. If attention is scattered, direction dissolves. Reclaiming control starts with noticing where your attention has been leaking. You may not have chosen your current direction consciously, but you can choose the next one deliberately. Awareness turns wandering into navigation. Control of direction requires separating movement from momentum. Philosophy teaches that momentum can carry you far in the wrong direction. Just because you have been doing something for years does not mean it is aligned. Many people confuse consistency with purpose. Taking back control means pausing long enough to question trajectory, not quitting impulsively, but examining honestly. Is this path expanding you or shrinking you? Direction is not about speed, it is about alignment. Alignment restores authority. Another essential step is clarifying values. Philosophy teaches that values act as an internal compass. Without them, decisions are reactive. With them, choices simplify. When values are clear, direction becomes easier to maintain. You no longer chase everything that calls your name. You choose what resonates. Values filter noise. Noise confuses direction. Clarity sharpens it. Taking back control also requires responsibility without self-blame. Philosophy teaches that responsibility empowers when it is calm. Blame weakens. You acknowledge where you are without attacking yourself. From acceptance, movement becomes possible. Denial freezes direction. Responsibility restores it. You cannot steer a life you refuse to acknowledge. Direction is also reclaimed by reducing external influence. Philosophy teaches that constant exposure to others' opinions fragments purpose. When everyone else is steering, your path becomes diluted. Taking back control means limiting input. Fewer voices, clearer signal, direction strengthens in quiet. Another powerful shift is choosing long-term direction over short-term relief. Philosophy teaches that short-term relief often pulls you off course. Comfort distracts, discomfort refines. Direction grows when you tolerate discomfort for meaningful outcomes. Relief feels good now, direction feels right later. Choosing later over now restores control. Taking back control also means setting intentional boundaries. Philosophy teaches that direction is shaped by what you say no to. Every yes is a direction choice. Without boundaries, direction fragments. Boundaries protect focus. Focus sustains movement. Movement builds confidence. Direction also depends on identity. Philosophy teaches that you act in alignment with who you believe you are. If identity is passive, direction weakens. If identity is intentional, direction strengthens. Taking back control means redefining identity through behavior. You act first, identity follows, direction stabilizes. Another key is replacing reaction with planning. Philosophy teaches that reaction responds to pressure, planning responds to purpose. When life pressures you, reaction dominates. When purpose leads, pressure loses power. Even simple plans restore direction. Planning does not need perfection. It needs commitment. Taking back control also requires patience. Philosophy teaches that direction does not change instantly. Sudden shifts are rare. Gradual correction is realistic. Small, consistent choices realign trajectory over time. Impatience causes abandonment. Patience preserves direction. Direction strengthens through reflection. Philosophy teaches that reflection prevents unconscious drift. Regular reflection recalibrates intention. You ask simple questions: what moved me closer? What pulled me away? Reflection is navigation. Without it, drift resumes. Another important factor is courage. Philosophy teaches that direction demands courage because clarity attracts resistance. Fear resists change. Others may question your choices. Direction remains firm when courage outweighs approval-seeking. Approval fades. Direction endures. Taking back control also involves forgiving past misdirection. Philosophy teaches that regret anchors attention backward. Forgiveness releases energy forward. You learn without punishment. Learning sharpens direction. Punishment stalls it. Direction also grows through consistency. Philosophy teaches that repeated aligned actions reinforce purpose. Consistency turns intention into trajectory. Sporadic effort confuses direction. Repetition clarifies it. You become predictable to yourself. Predictability strengthens trust. Another shift is embracing uncertainty. Philosophy teaches that direction does not require certainty, it requires commitment. You move without full clarity. Clarity emerges through movement. Waiting for certainty delays direction indefinitely. Movement reveals the path. Taking back control also means choosing meaning over validation. Philosophy teaches that validation-driven paths feel empty. Meaning sustains effort. When direction is meaningful, obstacles feel purposeful. Purpose fuels persistence. Persistence maintains direction. Ultimately, taking back control of your direction means reclaiming authorship of your life. Philosophy teaches that direction is not found, it is chosen and reinforced daily. When awareness leads, values guide, and action aligns, direction stabilizes. Life stops pulling you randomly, you move deliberately, and that is real control. Taking back control of your direction continues when you stop confusing activity with progress. Philosophy teaches that many people stay busy to avoid feeling lost. Movement without direction feels productive, but it often leads nowhere. You answer messages, complete tasks, and fill your days, yet feel empty at night. This happens because direction was never chosen consciously.